Fair. For those who don't know me, I'm Emily Daniels. I'm the director of the Resource Fair, and this is our 5th year, and I believe our 3rd time having you here, Dr. Grandin.
Yep, okay.
Dr. Grandin, hello. This is one of our community just icons and wonders as a scientist, as a professor, and coincidentally, as someone with autism. One of Time's 100 most influential people, without question, has changed the humanity in which we treat our animals in various fields. Textbook writer, prolific, never stopping, got up at 4 this morning, had incidents at the airport, and still made it here. So I think we should give a big round of applause to start for Dr. Temple Grandin. I'm a fan, I just have to say. Well, Dr. Grandin, we are so happy to have you here. When we put out the tickets, we had folks come up with questions they wanted to ask you. And the very first question I have to ask you is, what is a typical day for Dr. Temple Grandin?
Well, a lot of traveling. I was at a women's cattle event yesterday, and I was in Worcester, Ohio. Drove to Cleveland Airport last night, and I got on a plane this morning, got here. Fortunately, everything went okay. The wind started messing things up. I got in here before that happened, so.
So traveling is your typical day?
Traveling, and then I have some days where I'm just at home and pretty much write.
And as you have seen, there are endless numbers of books that Dr. Grandin has been generous enough to sign today. What is your latest book that you've written?
Well, the latest book is on visual thinking, and I'm an object visualizer. Everything I think about is a picture. And another kind of thinker is your pattern, music, and mathematical thinker, and then you have word thinkers. Now, a lot of people are mixtures of the different kinds of thinking, and there's scientific research that shows that different thinking exists. But an autistic person might be an extreme object visualizer, or maybe an extreme mathematician. There's less being a mixture. And I'm very concerned that the object visualizers like me are getting kind of shunted out. Okay, the cover just fell off an engine today on Southwest Airlines. The mechanic did not latch it correctly. That's why that would have come off. And when I was out working in the meat plants with installing equipment, I worked with a lot of mechanical people that were brilliant at building things. And they're not getting replaced. They're not getting replaced. I'll tell you where they're at. They're playing video games in the basement when they ought to be making sure that the cover on the engine is latched on correctly. And the other thing in engineering, there's kind of 2 parts of engineering. There's the visual thinkers. Let's say a food processing plant. The visual thinkers make all the mechanical devices and lay out the factory. Then your degreed engineer, your mathematician, power, water, electrical, the refrigeration system, they do that kind of stuff. But what we're not getting is the object visualizer like me who can't do higher math. So in some states, I can't even graduate from high school. And the people I've worked with, they're retiring out. And they're not getting replaced. And it's skills that we really need. I'm very concerned about skill loss. And a kid can only get interested in things like fixing things or building things if they take shop classes. See, I think it's terrible that schools take out music. How can you find out you're good at instruments if you don't have music? I'm a big believer in exposing students to whole lots of different things. Now, I was watching the kids down there in the museum, and they just love that thing with the pipes, with the balls going through it. That thing seems to really hold the attention. I've been watching that for the last hour and a half. Really, really holds the attention. And that's pure mechanical, seeing how it works. How do I have to make it so the ball can, go through it? That's mechanical thinking. And so I have my visual thinking book, and then I also have different kinds of minds, which is a young reader's version of the book, especially an abridged edition. And I cut out some of the school policy stuff, but the important stuff on visual thinking, I did not cut any of that out. So if you end up getting that book instead, it's just sort of an abridged edition for young middle school readers. But we need, and I talk to businesses about this, we need all the different kinds of minds. And I worked with a lot of people that would have been diagnosed autistic. And one of the big problems I'm seeing today, kids aren't making the transition to work. They might be doing very well academically, but they've never gone shopping. They haven't had a bank account. They've never had a job. And we need to start getting jobs long before you graduate from high school, long before. I just ran into a young kid about 11 years old, and his grandfather had back surgery, and he's going to help him out with the lawn and stuff. Okay, that's the kind of stuff that can be a paper route substitute, a church volunteer job, walking the neighbor's dog. They got to be doing something on a schedule. Family's not the boss. Instant illegal, which is 14 in this state, for safe retail, they need to be getting jobs. So that they learn how to work before they leave. There's too much getting too stuck in the autism box, especially on the fully verbal. You see, then I go back into the, I was just talking with people, build cattle squeeze chutes, and, those are mechanical devices. And I talked to them and I said, well, who's going to be the junior version of you? Well, that's the problem. And we need the skills. A cover falling off a jet engine is not okay. And that's not Boeing's fault. That's maintenance. And then the whole Boeing mess. You need to have visual thinkers. They say, no, we're not going to, install the rudder bolts wrong. Or install the rudder pedals wrong, and then the pilot goes to land and the rudder pedals don't work. That's purely a mechanical device. And the degreed engineer, the mathematician, isn't that good with the mechanical devices. Like you see the control, if you get a window seat over the wing, you see the control surfaces move, and you can see all the hydraulics in there. It's the same stuff that's on a cattle chute. It's just fancier, but it's higher pressure, but it's the same stuff. Works exactly the same way. I can just see how it works, and it's got to work right. Aircraft control surfaces are really important. I fly all the time. I look at that hydraulics and I'm going, watch the pilot get up in the nose wheel, he's checking for hydraulic leaks. I've got to have somebody to fix this stuff. You see, there's a link between what goes on in the autism world and what goes on in industrial world. You see, this is the problem we got with autism. You're going from Einstein to somebody who can't dress themselves. See, this is the problem. And okay, somebody can't dress themselves is not going to be fixing aircraft engines or working over at Greeley building things.
Thank you. That's good to know. I think everyone thinks of you as a visual thinker, and I think the film that captured your life so beautifully.
The visual thinking is shown accurately in the HBO movie. That's very accurate, and the projects are accurate.
Which is tremendous. I'm curious, when you realized that not everyone thought the way that you thought, how did you discover that?
Well, I was shocked to find out other people didn't think in pictures. See, my mind my memories are sort of like, pictures on a phone. You can search through all these pictures and then they move a little bit. That's the way my memories are. Well, the way that I found out that other people didn't think the same way, I was in my late 30s. Like if I say to you, think about a church steeple, how does it come into your mind? I see specific ones. And they come up like a series of PowerPoint slides. But this one speech therapist, I asked her that same question. She just got pointy thing, 2 lines. A very abstract representation where I see specific ones. And you'll have some people that will might see kind of a New England steeple with some detail, but it's still generalized. So why the church steeple? Because if I say house or car, most people can see that. When I say something that's just out there in the environment, but you don't pay that much attention to them, I found that was the ideal thing to ask to differentiate them. Other ones I asked was boat, but if they own a boat, then that doesn't work. Or factory. When they work in a factory, then. But what I find about the steeples, even though they go in the church, most people don't pay that much attention to the steeple. It's just up there on the roof and.
Okay. you have always been very industrious. You are someone who is working constantly. It seems like you've been working since you put on shoes. Do you remember your first job?
Yeah, my very first job, mother got it for me when I was 13. She just set it up in the neighborhood with a lady that did dressmaking out of her home. And I took apart dresses and I hand sewed the hems. That was my first job. And mother just set it up in the neighborhood. We need to be doing a lot more of those things. High school was a horrible time for me, bullying and teasing. I got kicked out of school for throwing a book of all things at that another girl. So I went to special school and they put me to work running the horse barn, cleaning 9 stalls every day, putting them in and out, feeding them. I was responsible for taking care of the horse barn. So that was a job. You see, I had learned how to work. My mother was concerned about the academics, and Mr. Patey, the headmaster, said, well, let her get through her adolescence. But I think it's very important that I learned how to work.
Well, and you seem to have gotten into agriculture at an earlier age. Was it through that experience?
Well, I came from a non-ag background. All the exposure to ag started as a teenager. So this brings up another important thing. Kids get interested in stuff they get exposed to. I was exposed to musical instruments as a child. I was terrible at them. But another kid's going to take off with that. But you don't know until you expose them.
Are you glad that you went that route? Did that lead
Yeah,
you to...
no, it was a good route for me to go because I discovered this other visual side of engineering. I call it the clever engineering department. It's also called industrial process equipment. No engineering degree required. And the thing that was interesting, because I used to work with the Montfort Fab Shop, and unfortunately that all got shut down. Gigantic mistake made by ConAgra. That the shop people, they were inventing equipment and patenting it. But none of them had engineering degrees. But they didn't work on the refrigeration and the boilers. That's for the mathematical engineers that touch that stuff. Didn't build anything to have anything to do with that in the Montfort Fab Shop. It was all strictly mechanical devices. And sometimes the degreed engineer will say, well, they just build the equipment. No, they're inventing equipment. I spent 25 years working with them.
And I think the popular consensus is that you have a connection to animals and to how animals think that is profound. And how, do you think that's a real thing for you?
Yeah, it is a real thing, and I have a chapter in visual thinking on animal consciousness. And some of the discussion on that, I think, gets down to if you think in words, you might have a hard time imagining how a dog could think, because the dog's world is sensory-based. What is it? Its memories are going to be touch sensations, smells, things it sees, things it hears. It's a sensory-based world. Well, I don't think in words, so that's going to help me with animals. In fact, I discussed that in one of my other books, Animals in Translation.
This baffles me. Let me tell you why. Because you don't think in words, but you are one of the most prolific writers that I have ever heard of. So how do you translate your concept of things into language?
Words narrate the pictures. Words narrate the pictures. I do have to admit, I do have co-writers on a lot of my books. Now, if you go on Google Scholar and look up my journal articles, if I'm the sole author, then there is no co-writer. Like Thinking in Pictures, there was no co-writer. The Way I See It, there's no co-writer. A lot of my cattle textbooks, I have chapters in there where if I'm listed as the only author, then I am the only author. But where I needed the co-writer on the visual thinking, that was the big COVID project. And I did the rough drafts, but visual thinkers are associative, so they can get kind of disorganized because it's associative thinking. And then Betsy Lerner, my verbal co-author, she straightened them all out. You see, but that's the different kinds of minds working together using the complementary skills. But one thing I've learned about verbal thinking is they tend to overgeneralize. There's a lot of overgeneralizing, but they don't think enough about how do we actually implement something. So, okay, if we want to make the classroom better for kids with autism, we need to get rid of the LED lights that flicker. And you can detect those with slow motion video with your phone. Another thing that will help on a lot of jobs and a lot of school stuff is checklist format for tasks involving sequence. Okay, working at Walmart, got to close out that cash register, pilot's checklist of the steps. Then you're talking about bullet points with 1 to 3 words on each item on the checklist just to jog the memory. That can really work well. Pilot's checklist would save a lot of jobs because yakety yak 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 yak, I can't remember the sequence.
That makes so much sense. Thank you for that. In terms of that, I was thinking about how a lot of my autistic friends struggle with executive functioning.
All right, what is that? That's too overgeneralized. What do you mean by that?
Organization, initiation, follow through on a task, finishing that
Well,
task.
okay, let's look at the pilot's checklist. Will help them follow through on the task. Because then, when I was in graduate school, I worked in a dairy. Our school had a dairy, and they had a checklist on the wall of how to set up the milking equipment and clean it. That checklist saved me. Okay, so that's part of executive function. You see, get up on time and get to work on time. I never had an issue with that because that was so pounded into me. And then we had things like sit-down meals where we had to learn how to take turns talking. So let's go through the executive function. I want to dissect that. Okay, what else do you consider under executive functioning?
Well, I think it's the initiation of the task is very hard for a lot of folks I talk to.
They can't initiate a task. I don't know. When I worked in the horse barn, I had no problem with start cleaning the stalls. I didn't. So what kind of tasks are they having a hard time initiating?
Just getting started in a day can be hard. Just
Getting up.
Or if they have schoolwork, getting started on that schoolwork.
All right, well, let's just start making a time for it. One of the things that helps me on time management is I print out those print a calendar. You see, then when I'm planning flights, I figure if I'm going to fly east, I have to leave the day before blank because it takes a day to get there. Take a 10 o'clock flight, so I'm not getting up horribly early. Take a 10 o'clock flight, those arrive on the East Coast at 3:30 or 4. Well, that's eating up the whole day. See, coming back, you got the 2 hours going the other way. But when I look at the calendar, it makes it easier to do that. But let's say something simpler, like just getting up for work. Get an alarm clock and put it on the other side of the room.
It all sounds so simple.
But those are things where I had a lot of problems and I was a goofball student that didn't study because I wasn't interested until my science teacher gave me interesting projects and that motivated me to study to become a scientist. Algebra I never could do. I'm concerned I wouldn't be able to graduate from college in California or Oregon right now. But so I majored in psychology to dodge the math requirements. That's what I did.
You obviously have very good executive functioning skills now. Was that just ingrained?
But one thing where I don't have it, jobs requiring sequence, I would make pilots checklists. That is something I would still have to do. Okay, like take a piece of equipment apart, okay, take down steps, cleaning steps, reassembly steps. I would make checklists.
I like a good checklist. I would like to know also, because a lot of the folks I talk to also have a lot of difficulties with sensory overload or emotional regulation. Do you currently experience those problems?
Well, I have noise sensitivity. Now, here's something that sometimes helps, is if the kid hates the vacuum cleaner or something like that, let them turn it on and off. Let them turn it on and off. And vacuum cleaners can go to favorite playthings. Now, I'm worried about the individuals that wear headphones all the time. That's going to make sound sensitivity worse. What you can do is have them with you all the time. And then you get into one of those horrible bathrooms with all the hand dryers. Yeah, you put it on for that. But then other times when it's quiet, take it off. But you have it with you. So if a fire alarm goes off, then you can put it on. There's some of that. I flinch now. The reaction I have to those things. And I have to have soft clothes against my skin. That's still an issue. The other thing that's helped me with anxiety, and this is in my book, Thinking in Pictures, I do take antidepressant medication. I've been on them for 40 years. And it's a low dose. Got to be a low dose. Big mistake made Prozac or Zoloft or any of those drugs, Celexa, too high a dose. Throw the label away. It's wrong. Starter dose or less. starter dose or less on any of those SSRI type of drugs. Because I've had parents say, oh, they did great on a low dose and they doubled it and then they can't sleep. Don't. It's starter dose or less. I've been on a starter dose. And that's helped with a lot of things. The other thing that helps is exercise. Do 100 sit-ups every night. Every night. Hate every one of them. But that's those are things that can help. But the big problem I'm saying with the teenagers, they're not getting out and doing enough stuff.
In terms of teenagers, and it is very daunting to go out and try and get a job and do the interview process and all of those things. It can be overwhelming.
Skip the interview.
Tell me more, Dr.
Skip
Grandin.
the interview.
What
This
should
is
we do
where
instead?
mom and dad need to grease the skids and just get them into a job. No, skip the interview. And then what I learned to do was to sell my work. Show off pictures of jobs, drawings, show off the work. And when I was in high school, I had sign painting business. My first sign for pay was for a hair salon. I had to make a sign a hair salon would want. And it would not have had flying saucers on it. See, this, I put the Breck shampoo lady on it. You see, that's another important skill. You gotta, if you're doing art, you gotta do the art that client would want. It's another really important skill.
I want to go to flying saucers for just a second, because I hear through the grapevine that you're a Star Trek fan. Is this an
that's
accurate?
true.
Yeah.
Yep, that's accurate.
Which Star Trek level are we
Well,
at?
I started out with classic Trek, and I loved Mr. Spock's logicalness. I just thought Star Trek was wonderful, and I liked the idea of a prime directive, sort of a guiding thing. Right now at the age I'm at, is I want to see these kids that are different get out in good careers, because we need them. I fly all the time. I don't want the cowling to come off the engine. It's lucky it didn't break the control surface. Really lucky. You see, I know enough mechanics that could really wreck some of that hydraulics. If the control surface is deployed, you can see the hydraulic cylinders in there if you sit in the window seat. And I can see that cowling going in there and making mincemeat out of it. We need people that are good at fixing things. See, a lot of these kids that are playing video games in the basement, they ought to be fixing airplanes. They ought to be building stuff over at the Greeley plant. I'm very concerned about skill loss. We don't make the state-of-the-art electronic chip making machine. And a lot of the people I worked with, they just started out with shop classes, and that's how they got started. Then somebody has them build some little tiny thing, and then they like them, have them build a bigger thing. Next thing you know, they're building half the plant. I have seen that trajectory into a job. There was a guy that got a job, fiberglass tank factory, and he repaired every piece of equipment. Another guy I had lunch with started out just doing labor in a factory that makes stone countertops. Then he learned how to repair the equipment, and he's doing that all over the country now. Back door. Started out just sanding the stone countertops. And that's somebody I talked to maybe 2 years ago. Tank guy was about 2 years ago. These are recent. You see, that's my kind of mind. You see, then your mathematical mind is going to get the degreed engineer job. And they need to be doing career relevant internships while they're in college, because I'm seeing graduating magna cum laude and lose it in the workplace because no working experiences before they graduated. They got to learn to work. There was a girl about 10 years ago. Oh, she had the perfect mixture of physics, electrical engineering, mechanical engineering, and computer science. Had a job at a top company. And she quit. And I said, why'd you quit? And she said, I just didn't like it. Well, was there some problem? Did you have a quiet place to work? Did you have a boss that, the work not too boring or too hard? No, there was actually nothing wrong with the job. And I think she had problems with being away from family, but she made enough money that she could have flown back home, hour flight every weekend. I said, what are you going to do about health insurance? No, I kind of got mad at her for that. I said, you need to crawl up their front steps and try to get that job back. Because sometimes it is called work. The other thing I've seen as a problem is no job is perfect. No workplace is perfect. There's always going to be a certain amount of bad stuff going on in every workplace. So you got to put it on the scales of justice, and the good has to outweigh the bad. And there's always going to be a certain amount of what I call grunt work. Like when I worked for the magazine, I had to type up show and sale results. That's just lists. That wasn't fun, but that was part of the job. You've got to do that. And I do draw the line. I worked for a company where I handled their advertising, and they wanted me to place ads in a magazine that I knew they weren't going to pay for. No, I quit. That I'm not going to do. Where I'm asked to do something myself that's dishonest. No, not going to do that. But every workplace is going to have some stuff wrong with it. You just have to say now, is the good outweigh the bad? Never will be perfect.
You are a mentor to many. Did you have a mentor growing up that made a difference in your experience?
Well, I had Mr. Carlock, my science teacher, very important mentor when I was a junior, senior in high school and just starting out in college. Another mentor was Jim the contractor. And he was a former Marine Corps captain starting a tiny little steel and concrete construction company. And he seeked me out to design things. He was another important mentor. He showed me how to set up the business. Really, really important. And the mentors get attracted to ability. And another person was Norb, the superintendent at the Swift plant. I kind of made my own internship there. I'll never forget when Norb said, you got to keep persevering. And when I had some really bad times, like on my third design job at a ranch, the ranch foreman was making sexual moves to me, and I pushed him off. And he told the owner that the corrals didn't work. And it's very, very difficult to deal with that when somebody that's judging your work does that. Now, I had other bad things happen, like testicles on my car, bull testicles on my car. That did happen. And that was easier to deal with because it wasn't the boss that evaluated my work. And Jim the contractor counseled me and said, you need to just keep on going. There's going to be other projects. And he helped me to keep on going, but I almost quit. It was like my third design project. I also did them freelance. Go in, get the job done, get out. That also helps with a lot of the politics. My job is to go in there, make the thing work, and then leave.
And what part of your work is, get yourself some water there. Yeah. I'm going to ask the question, what part of the work is most satisfying to you? What are you enjoying doing the most with your time?
Well, I really like teaching, and yesterday I was teaching some students some of the beginner stuff about cattle handling. And what I'm going to like is if they go home and use it, and then I find out that it worked for them. That's something I like. Or I find out that somebody read one of my books and their kid got a great job, or their kid went to college. See, I like to make real things happen. And I was in the food court after I got off the plane. I went in the food court to eat Chinese food and have some ice cream before I came up here. And I read the thing about the cowling coming off the plane and some of the Boeing stuff. And I'm just getting madder and madder and madder and madder. Because why did they sell their factory to private equity? I'm not a fan of that sort of stuff.
That sounds like a pet peeve.
Well, it is a pet peeve. I do not like sitting in the food court for breakfast at the Denver airport. This was Concourse B, to go on a flight on United. And I found out that Boeing sold the factory that makes the fuselages. That's the plane bodies. to private equity, and that they had loose rudder bolts. This is not tray tables here. Rudder bolts. That, and then a week later, 2 weeks later or something, I find out about the foot pedals, rudder pedals that didn't work. That kind of stuff. That's stuff that in your car, they never do maintenance on that kind of stuff. It should work for the life of the airplane. And then I found out, I just found out on this last trip, I talked to a lady who worked for Boeing she worked for that factory that turned into Spiro Aerosystems. And when private equity came in, they put a clothing executive in charge of the airplane factory. You've got to be kidding. Yes, you better believe it. It's a pet peeve. That's more than a pet peeve. I hate them.
Oh, I do. I hear you.
I just hate them.
As you should. As you should. I'm going to get to some questions that people had come up with ahead of time.
Okay, fine. All right.
So they may seem a little out of, context here. But this one is, I'm going to read it directly. How were you able to achieve the goals that you wanted while also having to manage certain traits that other people would see as wrong, inappropriate, and a reason to let someone go from a job?
Well, my very first job, I criticized welding, and I said it looked like pigeon doo-doo. And Harley, the plant engineer at the Swift plant, pulled me into his little office in the boiler room. I remember it as well as if it happened yesterday. He said I had to apologize for that. He was a very good job coach. He told me what I should do, calmly and quietly in private. Well, and then there was another autistic guy that worked in the library, and he was making fun of fat people in the elevator. And they told him not to do it, and then they fired him. Yeah, he was told not to do it. See, the thing is, after I was told, I stopped doing it. I took the advice. And I think some of this helped me was 50s upbringing. 50s upbringing, you were taught to say please and thank you. You had sit-down meals. At 4 o'clock, at 4:30 this morning, I was in the hotel lobby talking to the night guy who was going to take us to the airport. And he has a brother or something, has an autistic kid. The kid's 8 years old and doesn't want to do things. And I explained, let's start doing some things. You sit down meals, and that means mom and dad, everybody, we're going to put all the phones away. In the 50s, you weren't allowed to bring toys or books to the table, or parents couldn't bring newspapers to the table. It was a time that everybody sat down and you had some family meals. And the rule when I was a child, if I pitched a big fit, there was no TV for one night, unless it was sensory overload when the ferry boat horn went off. I wasn't punished for that. But other times I pitched a fit, there was no TV for one night. And I said, you're going to have to start, making some rules and enforcing it. This was not sensory overload. And he was very good at playing hockey, and I said, don't take that away. He behaves when he's playing hockey. No, we're going to take the iPad away or the phone away for one night. Or the video game or something like that. That's the stuff you take away. Never anything that could turn into a career or make friends. Now, I know another question on there was about friends. Friends who shared interests. When I was in high school, I had friends who horseback riding, model rockets, and electronics. Friends who shared interests. I'll have a mom say, well, my kid's in the high school band and doing great. That's an example of friends who shared interests. Stuff they can do together with other kids. Robotics club or choir, some activity they do together. And when I was in college, I was bullied, and I went in a school-wide variety show. Made scenery and sung a silly song. That helped my social life a whole lot.
I wish I could have seen that. Your family was a big support for you growing up. Your mother, you speak of a lot. What were some things that you appreciated about how you were parented beyond obviously we know they were enforcers?
Well, they always encouraged my ability in art. I was encouraged to do lots of things. And I was good at art, and take that, I would just draw the same horse over and against the head over and over again. Mother would expand it. Do the body, do the stable. Take the thing the kid's fixated, expand on it, but have something related to the horse. the stable, the saddle. Let's draw other things. Maybe draw a place we ride the horse to. You know, she always encouraged the things I was good at.
Did you have interventions the way that we do now, like occupational therapy, speech therapy, things like that?
Well, I had speech therapy as a very young child. That went until I was turned 5. Then I was mainstreamed into a regular kindergarten, small school with 12 students. Started out just doing half a day to start out. And you see, the old-fashioned 50s upbringing, you see, this is why I think some of the granddads that come up to me, they discover they're autistic when the kids get diagnosed. But for the fully verbal, well, they learned working skills. You see, in the 50s, you were just taught, and it wasn't done mean or anything, it was just taught in a much more systematic way. Saying please and thank you, being on time. If I forgot to say please, mother would cue me. You forgot to say, she'd cue me. And then sit down meals. Also, I made money collecting money for charity. I had to talk to people. In our neighborhood, when kids were 7 and 8, they had to put their good clothes on and greet the guests, be little hosts and hostesses. That was a standard 50s thing. That was really helpful.
You of course were a perfect child, but
No, I was definitely not a perfect child.
No, but I'm just going to say that there must have been some moments that are hard for sensory reasons or otherwise. And what was helpful for you in terms of how you were responded to when you were having a hard time?
Well, that again is real general. Okay, when I threw a fit on the ferry boat and the horn went off, they let me ride below. They realized that was sensory. But pitching a fit in class at school, in the quiet classroom, the rule was pitch a fit, no television for one night. And if I did it at school, the teacher called my mother, and I'd get home and she'd say, well, Mrs. Deach called today, and there'll be no TV tonight. You know the rule. Or if I pitched a big one, she'd put me in my room and let me calm down. Then after I'd calmed down, she'd say, okay, you know the rule. She didn't go, I'm going to take the TV away. She'd wait until it was all calmed down. That's what I told the hotel night guy to do with this boy, this 8-year-old boy. I said, pitches one, put him in his room, wait until he's calmed down. He says, now you know the rule. There'll be no iPad tonight. Or whatever device he's using. You see, just done in a really quiet, consistent way. Because when I talked to him, it was obvious that the kid was manipulating. And we're going to need to have some sit-down meals. And that means all the phones are put away. In the 50s, there were no newspapers and magazines at the table, toys or books or anything like that. This was the time that everybody was going to get together and put all the stuff away. I'd like to see in these families at least one meal a day where you do this for 20 minutes.
I imagine that, just like last night, or this morning rather, when you talked to this gentleman, people come up and ask you questions all the time.
All the time. And I had a 15-minute conversation with this desk clerk while I was waiting for the other person who's going to the airport to come down.
What are some of the more common questions you get?
Well, a lot of the questions we're getting right now these are the common things that I talk about that come up over and over again. You see, and I think something like executive function, that's too vague. Let's talk about being on time. And the pilot's checklist, that is probably one of the most important interventions because basically I have no working memory. Well, long-term memory. I need an external working memory. And by the way, the pilots are required to do it every single flight.
We had a self-advocate speak earlier today, and they were saying that they felt like they regretted that they didn't ask for what they needed related to their autism. So in terms of schooling, they didn't advocate for some support.
Well, when I failed my first math quiz, I got help. I didn't wait. That's a big problem. And it wasn't called advocacy. It was called get tutoring before you fail the class. It's that simple. And I did that.
I love how straight up you are. Here's a question for you. What are personal characteristics that are found, and this sort of, we've touched on this a little bit, but are found in the best animal behaviorists?
Well, they tend to be visual thinkers. And they just very, very observant. of the animal behavior. Like yesterday, we were looking at some cattle going through a portable corral system, and there was a metal plate on the floor, and the heifer stopped at it. And I said to the people there, now, you see it? She stopped at that metal plate. You need to put some dirt on it, so you don't have this sudden change from dirt floor to a metal floor. You need to observe things like that.
Does that just come naturally for you to
Yeah,
just
it was
notice
obvious to me. See, when I first started working with cattle, it was obvious to me to look at what cattle were seeing. But I guess if you're a more verbal thinker, you don't think about what cattle are seeing. Well, I've got a picture of a shadow I call the spider monster. It was at one of the big packing plants 2 years ago. When we started up, everything was working just fine. Then the cattle refused to go through the crowd pen. And I went down and looked at it, and there was this big spider monster shadow from an overhead structure. And it hadn't been there in the morning. But at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, it was there. And then an hour later, it was gone. It had to do with the position of the sun. And they didn't know what the problem was. I took one look at that, and that's just a couple. I go, yuck! Get that shadow. No wonder the cattle won't go.
I do have a question that I'm still curious about. Do you still use the squeeze machine?
No, it broke about 12, 15 years. I never got around to fixing it. But there was a point where maybe I didn't need it anymore. But one of the things I did with the squeeze machine, it calmed me down. But the other thing is I could control the squeeze machine. So that helped me get to where I could tolerate other people touching me and hugging me. By desensitizing myself with a squeeze machine, that would be similar to the child turning a vacuum cleaner on and off to desensitize themselves.
All right, I have this question for you. You do seem to work constantly. Do you have any extracurricular interests or hobbies?
Well, I just went to the Dune movie. I like science fiction movies, and there's some movies you got to see in the theater. So I went and did that.
All right.
Avatar was another one.
Oh, you like those?
Yeah, I liked Avatar. Yep.
And you like the big experience with the...
Yeah, for those kind of movies. Now, there's other movies, they're fine on a plane. And then the little TV I read a really interesting book on wildlife management that I bought in the Cleveland airport of all places I read. But then the little TV got set on the stupidest thing about plastic surgery. I didn't put the headphones on, but keloids and stuff like this. I'm going, oh, you gotta be kidding.
This has nothing to do with that. But what are some misconceptions you think people have regarding autism?
Well, the problem is they've made it such a broad spectrum now because they merged the Asperger's, which is basically socially awkward with no speech delay, into the wider autism. So now you've got Einstein at one end, and you've got somebody who can't dress themselves, maybe has very severe epilepsy on the other end. Then you got some nonverbals that can learn to type. I'm a big fan of teaching them to type. Then you need to use an iPad or some similar tablet because the print appears next to the keyboard. Okay, if you're on a laptop, look down here, the print appears here. They can't make the attention shift. That's why you have to use something like a tablet.
I have a personal question. I'm a fan of your wardrobe. I was trying to find something that emulated the shirt. You have a good sense of fashion. I don't know where you find them. I looked everywhere to find.
Well, I've been collecting them over the years.
All right.
And some of the shirts are getting harder to find.
Agreed. I was looking endlessly, but you wear them.
You
well.
go and they just have all these plaid shirts. The other problem is they've made the women's sizes smaller because, like, this is a women's extra large. This shirt's old. I can still wear it, but I put on a women's extra large today. I can't button it. I can't even get the shirt on. They've made them a Chinese lady's extra large. There's just no way that I can wear them.
Very good. You are at CSU. We are all CSU fans here.
Yep.
We want to know how you got there and what keeps you there.
Well, what got me there was Bernie Rowland, the philosophy professor, who did, he's dead now, animal ethics classes. And after I got my PhD in animal science, I called up Bernie and I said, do you think I could teach part-time at CSU? And he had me come and do a seminar, and I got hired quarter time to start with. Now I'm a half-time.
And you're sticking with it?
Yeah, I'm going to stay with it.
That's good for all of us.
Teaching my livestock handling class, I've got it tomorrow.
She doesn't get a day off. Yeah.
No, I got to get home and answer a pile of correspondence.
She has a Zoom call tonight.
We didn't have a
Let me
Zoom
just
call.
say. Dr. Grandin, we are so delighted that you're here. I'm just curious, if you were to describe yourself to someone else, are there any words you would use? Like, how do you define your identity?
Well, a career is very important to me. Having an interesting career. I see too many people where they're too far into the autism. Autism is an important part of who I am, but being a professor and a scientist, that comes first. And right now, at the age that I'm at, like talking to the people yesterday, there was all kinds of students there yesterday, and they didn't know the basics on cattle handling. Well, doing things with students and encouraging them, helping the young people to get and do things. But the biggest problem I'm seeing with fully verbal autistic teenagers, they're not doing enough stuff. The parents do too much stuff for them. I'm appalled at the amount of teenagers that have never gone shopping. We'll never forget a 12-year-old girl that came up to me at one of the airports and with her mom and wanted a picture. And I asked her if she'd ever shopped. So I gave her a $5 bill and I said, go across the hall of that shop and buy something. It was just across the hall. It was right there. We could see it. She bought a drink and brought the change back. She had never shopped before. And then I said to one mom, next time you buy gas, pull a $5 out of your pocket and have them go in and buy something in that store. And the mom goes, I don't know when I can have the guts to do this. The other thing we got to work on is driving. And it's going to take longer. I was lucky that my aunt's mailbox was 3 miles away on a dirt road. I started in the middle of the horse pasture. Let's start in the middle of a big parking lot, a dry field, a dry flat field. That's where you start. So if the car lurches 50 feet, it doesn't hit anything. That's where you start. A totally safe place. And you might do 20 minutes a day in that parking lot for a month before you venture out on. See, the 3 miles away, the mailbox took 20 minutes up and back. Perfect. And the other thing that I think is going to be a problem is a lot of kids don't know how to steer today. I did not have to learn how to steer the vehicle. I did have to deal with the horrible clutch, 3 on the tree, manual shift, horrible clutch. But I knew how to steer. And so that's another thing that might take more time because I've ridden a bike. I'd ridden a bike safely to a lot of places.
How do you feel about taking my 16-year-old out?
Let's start in the middle of we're going to start in the middle of find a parking lot with no light poles. Because when I mean nothing to hit, so if it lurches 50 feet, you're not going to hit anything. That's what you got to do with your 16-year-old. Or I started in the middle of the horse pasture and the horses took off, so there was nothing to hit.
You are a treasure. You are a scientist. You are a professor. You are autistic, and you are a hero for many of us. So thank you for being here
today. I want to
today.
see these kids that are different get out and do things. We need their skills. We need them. I've been out to Silicon Valley. I've been out to the tech companies. Half those programmers are the mathematical people on the spectrum.
And we need Dr. Grandin. So let's give her a round of applause, please. Thank you so much for being
I'll
here.
go down to where the books are. There's a few more books. I'll sign them. And then I got to get back, do this Zoom call tonight, and I got scads of correspondence to answer.
And when do we go to bed?
I actually go to bed early.
Yeah, you should.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Thank you so much.
All righty.
Thank you, Dr. Grandin. Fantastic.